So with that, hi everyone. Thank you so much for joining us for our third FishSounds Educate Seminar. For today, we're excited to have Dr. Jack Greenhalgh, who will be talking about his amazing research on freshwater soundscapes. And before I hand it over, please note that this seminar will be recorded and put on the FishSounds YouTube channel for future viewing. So hi, YouTube. And we should also have time for questions at the end. So with that, Jack, I'll stop sharing my screen and you can take it away.
Thank you very much. Okay. All right. So I trust you can see the screen okay?
Yep, you're all good.
Excellent. Yeah, so my name is Jack Greenhalgh, and I am currently working in the north of Spain in the Pyrenees, where I'm studying the soundscapes of mountains and valleys. But really, my passion is exploring the bizarre and often overlooked world of freshwater soundscapes. It's what I have been doing since I was a master's student, and I've been smuggling it round in my PhD and various jobs and things. So it's something I'm very interested in. I'm very happy to talk to you about it today. And I'm going to do so by talking about two very different habitats. First of all, I'm going to talk about a temperate pond, and then I'm going to take you to near the equator to the Gambia and explore some of the sounds as we go upriver through the River Gambia. But first of all, it's important to mention that freshwater ecosystems are in a really tricky spot at the moment. I mean, we're losing wetlands at a rapid rate. You only have to think of places like the Pantanal in southwestern Brazil, Bolivia, that are experiencing a dramatic rate of habitat loss. We've lost an incredible amount of freshwater megafauna, even as recent as 1970. And in fact, this is quite a famous figure from the WWF Living Planet report. And I think it can be taken with a bit of a pinch of salt, but this shows that there has been an alarming decrease of freshwater biodiversity around the world since 1970. So there's this incredible loss of biodiversity from all ecosystems, really, but especially in freshwater ecosystems. And also freshwaters are really valuable for carbon storage and ecosystems like peatlands and then mangroves as well in kind of brackish areas, which I'll come to later. And so freshwater ecosystems are incredibly important and very under threat. So studying them from all different angles and perspectives is very important. So first of all, we're going to push past the bulrushes and lily pads and go underneath the water in a temperate pond. And these there will be examples of ponds from mainly the southwest of the UK. All kinds of things make sounds in freshwater environments. I'll introduce you to some of the band members. There are fish, of course, that produce sounds. This is the freshwater drum. And amphibians obviously make lots of noise, and this is the invasive, or at least in the United States, bullfrog. It's a rather cool sound. And in fresh waters, it's insects that really dominate the soundscape, and they make sounds by this process called stridulation, which is a great word. It means rubbing two hard body parts together. Crickets do it in the terrestrial environment, in grass fields and things. And in the marine environment, it's done by diving beetles and water boatmen primarily. And they make these ubiquitous sounds in temperate pond soundscapes that sound a bit like this. And on the right-hand side here, you can see a visual representation of the types of sounds that are being made by the boatmen. So as you listen to the sound, you can imagine what this might look like. And these are spectrograms, for those that aren't familiar, which simply plot the frequency or the pitch of the sound against the time. So this is the water boatman. Make these kind of eerie rattling sounds, pretty much any temperate pond you find, you're likely to come across these sounds. And actually, there's a fun fact associated with these that the pygmy water boatman is in the Guinness World Records for having the loudest penis because it uses its penis to rub up against its abdomen and makes an incredibly loud sound, up to 99 decibels, which if you were sitting next to it on a on its scale in the pond world, it would be like sitting in the front row of an orchestra and having all the instruments blast at you, an incredibly loud sound made in an incredibly strange way. So there are all kinds of weird stories that you can unearth from listening to ponds. Um, this is a breakdown of a systematic review that I did where we looked at 124 studies, and we were interested in of people who study freshwater ecosystem sounds, what is the breakdown of the species groups that are being studied? And we found that most studies were focusing on fish, which makes a lot of sense. I mean, they're big, you can see them, you can catch them, put them in aquariums in universities around the world very easily. We know how to do that, and they make often quite distinctive idiosyncratic sounds. And so fish represent by far and away the largest amount of studies, but actually it's arthropods, it's the insects, excuse me, that are producing a lot of the sounds and really dominating the soundscape. So I think there needs to be a shift now towards trying to study and catalog these arthropod sounds, and I'll come to that in a minute. Also in the review, we found that there's a shift now moving from, and maybe previous talks in the series have found this, that there's a shift from studying bioacoustics or the focusing on just a single species to now focusing on studying the soundscape or all the sounds in the environment. And that really is the type of science that I'm doing. In a more recent review, we looked at globally. So if arthropods, if insects are really the dominant sound producers in temperate ponds, then globally, how many species are likely to produce sounds? And we looked at data from GBIF, which is this online tool that holds taxonomic data. And we then estimated globally the number of insect species that are likely to produce sounds. And well, beetles, as they are often the most diverse group in many aspects, here again are diverse in the number of species that are likely to produce sounds around the world, as are water boatmen, caddisflies, and dragonflies too, a little bit of them. So there's incredible potential here. If we can catalog these sounds, then maybe we might be able to start inferring some real meaningful ecological information from this breadth of species that are likely to be sound producing. I mentioned that the water beetles and water boatmen are the key members of the band in the temperate pond. And these are some microscope images that I took of the instruments that they're playing. These are wonderfully named parts of their anatomy, like a file, a plectrum, and a scraper, quite musical names. And actually, we've known for a long time that different species of insects are likely to be producing different sounds because the parts of the anatomy that they use to produce sound are often used in identification guidebooks to distinguish between species, as you can see here. So if they've got different instruments, then it logically follows that they must be producing different sounds. And I recorded a few of these sounds in a tank. So here we have the sound of the cherrystone, wonderfully named cherrystone water beetle. Followed by the equally wonderfully named supertramp water beetle. I think hopefully you can hear that there are quite distinctive sounds that are being made there. And you can see from the description, the statistical description of the sounds, that there are differences there. So it's potentially possible that we can catalog these species and then use them, because they're wonderful indicators of different ecological conditions to infer ecological condition. But it's not just insects and fish and amphibians that make sounds in ponds. Amazingly, submerged aquatic plants are also producing sounds. And so here we've got some sounds of various different plant species. So this is, I forget the common name for this, but you can see it here. These are sounds produced as oxygen bubbles, tiny little oxygen bubbles, are released via openings on the leaf structure surface called stomata. And in the terrestrial environment, this is used as a gaseous exchange part of their anatomy. And again, when it's submerged under the water, oxygen can be streaming out of these holes and it's producing this ticking and whining sounds. Here we go. This one, I do remember the name, common name is rigid hornwort. Hopefully, maybe here you can see there are some oxygen bubbles that are tipping up. And then this is water crowfoot, ranunculus. Okay, and then hopefully if this works, there's a video here. Where's my cursor? Oh, here we go. So this is the whole freshwater soundscape now. I'm going to take you below the water and into the pond. You've got the rat, the water boatman, the constant ticking sound of oxygen bubbles being released from the plants. Okay. Get through there. Okay. So this is the pond soundscape. We can get a lot of information just simply by listening to a pond. It's a very non-invasive way, like all these passive acoustic methods are. And we can get information on lots of different trophic levels. So we've got primary producers in the form of plants. We've got consumers in the form of boatmen, but also amphibians and fish, as previously mentioned. And then even processes like decomposition can be picked up as methane bubbles were released from the sediment and pop on the surface. So we can get a breadth of information right across multiple levels of the ecosystem using acoustics. One of the aspects of my research on temperate ponds was describing the daily acoustic activity cycles in ponds. And this is the activity cycle of a pond in Bristol. And what's interesting is that during the nighttime, the soundscape is very dominated by these boatmen, the aquatic insects. They all come out at night and they call in large choruses together as they search for mates. And this happens at the cool of night, often with the moon as well, but it plays a part in this. And you can see this here reflected in the graph. And then in fact, actually, at both twilight times, but as the sun comes up, these sounds fall away, and these animals are very triggered by light intensity and by temperature. And so presumably as the light intensity increases and the temperature does, these animals begin to increasingly stop calling. And there are these intermediate quiet periods around the twilight hours. And then in the daytime, we get a plant-dominated soundscape as all of these plants are whirring away like factories under the water as the sun beams down on the lake or the pond. And so this was really interesting, this discovery. And you can see this reflected in the spectrograms. So we have on the left-hand side a nighttime recording showing multiple species of water boatmen calling actually at different frequencies, potentially as a way of avoiding overlap with each other. And then the same thing, but at midday with aquatic plants. And you can see there how they're really dominating the soundscape. And as I mentioned before, I mean, characterizing these different species and these different sounds is really important because it's what we do when we do conventional freshwater biology. We go out with pond nets and we find these different invertebrates, and they are classified by how fussy they are, really, how whether they like good, clean, healthy environments, or and then they get quite a high number, as you can see here on the right-hand side, this figure. And if they are really only found in quite degraded habitats, they get quite a low score. And then if you can sample these and tally up your score, you can get a good indication actually of the status of that ecosystem. Um, I wonder if we could do that by detecting the sounds that they produce. That could be interesting. But not only that, I mean, we can tell the age of a pond perhaps through how different species colonize the pond. So it seems that diving beetles are early colonists, so it's likely that they're typical of younger ponds, whereas things like leaf beetles are found in a pond that's been much more established. So we can tell the ecosystem condition and also perhaps the age of the habitat based on these identifications. But the problem is that we don't really know how the sounds, so we don't know whether the soniferous species are necessarily going to be indicators of good ecological status. So it doesn't necessarily follow that a really complex and noisy freshwater soundscape is going to be a healthy one. And it might be that we're looking for a few key soniferous species that we don't know yet that will be indicative of a good or a degraded one. And so this figure here is showing that in different types of freshwater habitats, we might get slightly different responses with the soundscape. And so there's a lot of work here to be done on investigating exactly that. But to that end, I mean, actually with Fish Sounds and with Audrey and others, we are working on a global initiative called the Freshwater Sounds Archive to catalogue freshwater species sounds and help build this library so that we might better understand this puzzle of the freshwater soundscape and help try and put that puzzle together and make some meaningful ecological conclusions. And so far, we've got quite a few contributors from around the world. And if you're interested in getting involved, then please do. You can find it on the Fish Sounds website, and there'll be links and things. And if you submit some sounds to the archive, then you'll be invited to be a co-author in a publication that will come out subsequently. So it would be great if anyone has some sounds that they have recorded that you could submit them. And then one thing that we might do if we start to establish such a big library is that we can start using techniques like machine learning that are so widespread with the detection of birds and bats, marine mammals. We can apply those techniques when we have this reference library to the automatic detection of freshwater insects and then potentially infer ecological condition from there. Yeah, this is a figure showing how I sampled 5 different ponds using a pond net, and it's showing with the larger speaker where it's most noisy, and then the speakers decrease as the soundscape gets quieter. And you can see that it's where all these insects are, the water boatmen, the beetles, that we have the noisiest soundscapes. And then species more characterized by lake or larger open water environments seem to be quieter. Okay, so now I'm going to take you a few thousand kilometers south of the UK to the Gambia. We're going to go upstream and see what we can find on a tour up the River Gambia. So, well, the Gambia is in West Africa and is a country really defined by the river. As you can see here on the map, the country's border pretty much mirrors the river. And therefore, the river is essential to the lives of everybody that lives in the country. It has a lot of mangrove habitat, which is essential for the breeding environment, the nursery grounds for marine species, for freshwater species, but also it's a fantastic storer of carbon. And these are under threat. But not only that, there's an increasing problem of saltwater intrusion into the river. So the water in the Gambia River is becoming increasingly salty further and further upstream. And this has huge problems and implications for a lot of people who rely on agriculture and fishing for their living. And there's a lot of rice cultivation on the banks of the Gambia, which with salt water is destroyed, and the livelihoods of the people that farm it. And a lot of freshwater fishing that people would rather do rather than catch the few marine species that are occupying this brackish water. The bigger freshwater, tastier freshwater fish are being confined more and more towards the northern or the eastern end of the river, I should say. And so, this is having huge implications for the people that live there. I was part of a team that went there in the summer, and we looked at three different locations along the river. Firstly, Tendaba, which is a location that is consistently in the saltwater area. And the extent of the saltwater intrusion is quite significant. The longest river in Spain has saltwater up to about 20 or 30 kilometers inland, but this river has saltwater now up to about 180, 200 kilometers inland. So it's an incredible change to the ecosystem that's happening. And this saltwater intrusion is mostly happening because of sea level rise, and it's happening as well due to increasing drought and a lack of fresh water from rain that's entering the system. And so we started here in Tendaba, which is mainly salty area, Senegambia, which can be an intermediate area, and then Walikunda, which is normally fresh. And well, I was part of a team that were doing lots of things. They were doing environmental DNA. They were going out into villages and interviewing people, and I was there to record the sounds of the river using a hydromoth, a cheap recorder like this. This is a Sentinel-2 satellite image of the river, or a part of the river while we were there. And in this bend here is where the boundary between the salt and the fresh is occurring. You can see where the color of the water is changing slightly there. But yeah, it's just a cool image. I think this one. So this is a spectrogram of 24 hours representation of the saltwater area of the River Gambia. And well, this really is a pilot study, and we've got a little bit of data. So I'd be curious if there are some marine-oriented soundscape people in the audience, what they think some of these sounds might be, because I'm not so sure. So it'd be interesting to get some input on that. This hydromoth was actually exposed as the tide changed, such as the extent of the tide change there, that there were some periods where it was actually a terrestrial recorder, but that was all right because we got some bats. But I'll play you now the soundscape of this is 4:20 in the morning in the River Gambia. Okay, so lots going on. I think that that fire crackling sound is made by snapping shrimp. I mean, I know they're quite ubiquitous in marine soundscapes, and I'll come on to some justification on that in a minute. And the whooping, howling call that you can hear, I think that's some kind of fish. But yeah, like I say, it'd be interesting to get some people's thoughts on this. So snapping shrimp, for those who don't know, they're really widespread across marine ecosystems all around the world. They're sometimes called pistol shrimps because they have this amazing claw that opens up and creates a little pocket that can be closed very quickly and shot like a pistol and makes these snapping sounds, and they use it to stun prey and burrow. And they're also found in West Africa, and so I think it's possible that they may well be in parts of the River Gambia. And because they're marine species, they, in this case, would be a good indicator of whether we're in a salt part of the river or a fresh part of the river. This is a spectrogram I've taken from a study in 2022, this blue one on the left, of snapping shrimp. And then on the right-hand side, you can see a spectrogram of the snapping shrimp that I recorded. So to me, that looked kind of similar. And then the same thing for some justification on fish. So fish, I mentioned the freshwater drum at the beginning of the talk. Fish produce sound by, well, they have a swim bladder. Fish that have a swim bladder, which is a part of their body that they use to maintain buoyancy in the water, is full of air. And on that, they have a special muscle called a drumming muscle. And they can vibrate this muscle and play it like a drum. And this sends out often quite low frequency sounds into the water. And so up here in pink or kind of orangey color, these are some of the fish that I recorded from the Gambia. And then below in green and blue is a fish species that I lifted from FishSounds. So I'll play the fish from the Gambia. Big sound. And you can see the spectrograms kind of look similar in the way that they're formed. And I'll play the sound again now. So this is of a marine fish. So certainly that sound is reminiscent, I think, of whatever fish it is that we recorded in the Gambia. But what's cool is because there was a team also doing environmental DNA meta barcoding. We'll get some insights into the fish community that's present. So hopefully we might be able to narrow down some candidates as to what these sounds are. Anyway, okay, moving upriver now, and we've gone to the intermediate zone at the Gambia Bridge, and the hydromoth was deployed right in the middle of the river next to one of these pillars, about 2 or 3 meters below the water. And the current at times was incredible and actually contributed quite significantly to the soundscape, and I think suppressed some of the biological sounds. But I'll play some recording here. This is quite similar to the one before. Yeah, anyway, lots going on. But I think a similar cast of members, maybe some snapping shrimp and some unknown fish species. But yeah, but I think this is what's so exciting about it is that there's so much that we don't know. This is exploration for the first time. Okay. Yeah. So I mentioned that we could hear a lot of sound as the water was moving past the recorder. And it's possible that this could be useful information. Obviously not for the tides, because we know when those happen. But maybe in the event of a storm or whatever else, we could track these periods of heavy flow, which might be useful for other types of sampling. And I like that about acoustics. I mean, people use it for all kinds of creative ways, like in the rainforests, people are using it to detect the sounds of illegal chainsaws for logging or gunshots for poaching. And so passive acoustic monitoring doesn't necessarily need to just focus on natural sounds by any means. Okay, and now we've moved further up and we're in the freshwater environment. You see how dramatically different the soundscape is here. And I think what we've got, and actually I wasn't here. I mean, the team carried on and I'd gone back to Spain by this point, so I didn't even deploy this one. So I don't have that added benefit of seeing the environment and being there. But I suspect that these sounds here in the kind of teal color, pinky color, light pink color, are made by aquatic insects. And then we have all kinds of other things going on, potentially some frogs and some fishing activity. So I'll play you this. This is the freshwater now. Your guess is as good as mine on that, but interesting nonetheless, I think. And then here we had some, well, a really significant period of sound that I think potentially was caused by all these fishing boats that go out at twilight. And again, another interesting use for the application of sound monitoring. Interestingly here, like in the Temperate Pond, where the insects were quiet at twilight, a similar thing is happening here in the River Gambia. We have these periods of inactivity around sunrise and sunset. So that's curious. Clearly, there's a light intensity driven mechanism there. Okay, and then this just a really simple ordination of these three sites, showing how they separate out as you move up the river. So in blue we have the saltwater site. Purple is the intermediate site, but which really was saltwater. And then green we have the freshwater, and you can see them nicely separating out. And actually, I think these ones down here probably are when the recorder was out of the water for the terrestrial period. But yes, what can we say here? The freshwater possessed a distinct community, soundscape, reflecting the freshwater species community. It's possible to use acoustics as a way, an additional way, a way probably that could give you more information than just having a salinity center in the river, which they do have, that tracks the movement of salinity. But this could also give you that perspective, but then a perspective on the species communities, potentially when we know more about what's making the sounds, but also the behavior of those species, potentially. So yeah, interesting. And that concludes my talk. And so I think in summary, freshwater soundscapes are incredibly diverse and active and unexplored. And there's a lot of room for discovery and application for ecosystem monitoring in freshwater sounds. And also, sounds are really an innate way of engaging with people and can be used really effectively for science communication and dissemination of science to the public. So I think that as from a freshwater conservation perspective, it's a really valuable tool. And so with that, I'll say thank you very much. I'd love to hear some questions or any thoughts you might have about some of the sounds that I've played.
Thank you so much for that amazing presentation, Jack. I think it's been particularly fun. We started with marine mammals and then switched to fish, but yours really zooms out and gives the whole perspective of all different types of information you can glean from these soundscapes, which is really exciting. And so, yeah, we do have time for questions if anyone wants to hop in. Um, I do just want to share, Kelsey, who's on the call, and I have a phrase where we say something sounds fishy.
Mhm.
And so I would certainly lean toward your fish recording sounding fishy and maybe also sounding shrimpy on the other end.
Okay, good. Yeah.
But yeah, certainly excited to hear, other people's perspectives or maybe more as you delve into the recordings. With that, any questions? You can either send them in the chat or unmute. Brittany?
Yeah. Hi, Jack. Thanks so much for your
Hi.
presentation. It was super interesting, really engaging with all of those sounds. I was wondering what metric you used for acoustic diversity or how you
Oh yeah.
quantified that.
So acoustic diversity is a type of acoustic index, and acoustic indices are mathematical functions that consider variations in amplitude and frequency over time, and they're a way of analyzing like large acoustic data sets in a standardized and automated way, because you can just write some code and it will spit out a spreadsheet full of numbers. So yeah, no, it's a bit confusingly named, that one. The problem with acoustic indices is that it can be quite difficult to interpret, and you can never remember exactly how they're calculated. So I can't remember how acoustic diversity
That's
is
fair.
calculated exactly. But yeah, it's measuring the variations in amplitude and frequency over time in some way.
Okay, yeah. I was just wondering if it was like an ACI, like specifically an acoustic complexity index or something that you like specifically made. So
Yeah. Yeah, no, this I think is just the default settings of an acoustic index called acoustic
Okay.
diversity.
Yeah, sounds good. Thanks.
Thank you.
Thanks, Brittany. We got a message in the chat from Maria saying, congrats on the presentation. It was awesome. So thanks
Thank
for
you.
that.
Appreciate that.
Yeah. Um,
I have one, Jack, if you don't mind. It follows up on Brittany's bit. So I think your statement on and great talk, by the way.
Thanks.
The sounds were awesome. I'm always scared to play sounds during talks. So I think your statement on like diversity of the community not matching like a very complex soundscape, not indicating a very diverse system or a healthy system or things like that is like kind of spot on for the thinking of where the field needs to go because it's really
Mm.
wrestling with that right now of like, oh, hopefully if it's just a really diverse soundscape, then it's obviously a biologically diverse community and that's really good. And that's kind of from a community ecology perspective, things folks have gotten away from a long time ago. So do you think this is a good model? Like I know you have a lot of knowledge on soundscapes as a whole. So do you think this is a good system to sort that out where you can, kind of head into a pond and map the soundscape and find out who's there? Like, do you think this is a good candidate for kind of tackling some of that broader ecological theory, community ecology components of this work? Or, are
Yeah,
fish
you're
better or
talking
anything like
about
that?
temperate ponds in particular as ecosystems to try and tackle that challenge. Yeah. Well, I think what we know at this stage is that temperate ponds have um, very, very different soundscapes from each other. And they have very different freshwater communities too. I mean, it's very complex, and all these species are moving around. I mean, all the insects, the beetles and the bugs and everything fly. They've got wings and they're moving around. So that adds another layer of complexity. Um, but yeah, I think looking at what we're missing, I think, in the field at the moment, freshwater ecoacoustics, is soundscape studies that happen on a large spatial scale with lots of spatial replication. And if we had that combined with a good knowledge of what's actually there, maybe from environmental DNA or from some conventional methods, then we could start trying to maybe find some like latent soundscape information that we can relate backwards to these kind of a more hard evidence of conventional monitoring or DNA evidence. So yeah, I mean, I'm obviously an advocate for studying the sounds of ponds in that way. And I think it could be a good system. And it's needed that level of monitoring freshwater biodiversity, and especially in ponds because they get overlooked. And they're so vital for the health of rivers too, because these insects and amphibians are all connected to on a larger landscape scale to the rivers and to the lakes, and so they can't be seen in isolation.
Yeah, I really like it as a model system for that because I think when these theories are developed, they're then put against like coral reefs and it's just too much within the taxonomic diversity and the movement of the species. You can't
Mm.
control who comes and goes. You can't monitor it constantly, but a pond in front of you is a very very good model system for that. So yeah, again, just exceptional talk.
Thank you. Appreciate that.
And your responses follow up, or there's a question in the chat that follow up nicely with that. Nana, apologies if I'm saying that wrong, asks, Jack, what do you believe the future will hold for acoustic analysis of our world's aquatic ecosystems? eDNA is a different aspect of monitoring, and it seems the same can be said for soundscape analysis that show a different perspective to the science.
Yeah, well, I actually I just had a proposal funded that looks at using environmental DNA monitoring and passive acoustic monitoring in a complementary way to survey the ecosystem, because passive acoustic monitoring is great for um, monitoring over long time periods. I mean, you can leave many recorders out for many months, even years, passively collecting this data you can download and using these acoustic indices I mentioned earlier, analyze that data. But the problem is like when I was talking about the sounds from the Gambia, we often don't know what those sounds are. So you have good temporal resolution, but poor species identification. Where the reverse is true with environmental DNA, we've got really good species identification because we're matching literal bits of DNA against known copies in databases, but you've got poor temporal resolution because you're taking one water sample that captures just that moment that you took the sample. So combining those two methods together, I think, could be really insightful. And then more generally, I think that machine learning is going to become more and more important in the future. And especially in freshwaters. I mean, we know it works for the analysis of soundscapes and identification of birds and bats, marine mammals. So why not freshwater animals too?
Certainly. And they say brilliant. Thank you for your
Thanks for
response.
your question.
Yeah. But yeah, I was curious. So, as you did in your sampling in the Gambia, I know there's a lot of excitement about hydromoths and their affordability, and I was wondering if you could touch on what your experiences were with using them and how well they performed for what you were looking at.
Yeah, I mean they're fantastic. I mean they're identical really to an audio moth, which is a terrestrial equivalent, except that they have this waterproof case. So actually, if you've got an audio moth already and you're interested in using that for some underwater recording, then just get the underwater case and you can use it. And yeah, they're brilliant because, like you said, they're inexpensive. I mean, I think they more than pick up enough biological information to derive meaningful results, interesting science. And I haven't had any problems with them, and they're pretty hardy. And there's all kinds of things in that river. We thought we might lose some to a hippo or two, but no, they're good.
Right. Or those strong river currents you mentioned,
The
right?
strong river currents, yeah.
Yeah. And I was looking into this. The prices might have changed recently, but a single hydromoth at one point cost the same as a single sample of eDNA. So you could
That's crazy.
processing. Yeah. So with the hydromoth, I figure you can reuse it multiple times.
Yeah.
But yeah.
Yeah. And in the Pyrenees, we've got 40 audio moths in this system that they've been out in the field for 2 or 3 years. And they're hardy things.
Yeah, that's really exciting. Any other questions? Either in the chat or you can unmute. I will leave a long pause just in case.
I had a really random question about frogs. Do they make sounds underwater as well as above water, or are you picking up those sounds from under the water and they're above?
Yeah.
If that makes
Yeah,
sense.
no, they do make sounds underwater, and tadpoles make sounds
Oh,
underwater as well. Yeah, you can hear them like crunching something as it's
very cool.
actually I'm going to be after my position here in Spain, I'm going to be moving to Canada. And the person who I'm working with there was telling me about these enormous tadpoles. I think it was Audrey, help me out here, like spate foot
Oh,
toad
I'm
or
not
something.
sure.
Anyway,
Unfortunately.
huge tadpoles, and he got very excited about the prospect of listening to these tadpoles and seeing how because I think you said they have
I've seen
yeah
tadpoles about this big,
they're the ones
just at a lake or a pond nearby, actually. Yeah.
right. Where in the world are you? In Canada, yeah.
Victoria, yeah,
Yeah.
Vancouver Island.
Yeah. Yeah. So who knows what they're up to in the soundscape.
Very cool.
But something interesting for sure.
Jack, is that the McGill position?
Yeah, I got it.
Cool. Congratulations. That'll be
Thank
great.
you. Yeah, no, we should talk.
Yeah, no rush. Let's catch up whenever. But that's awesome. That'll be a really cool group to be associated with. And yeah, the idea of them getting into acoustics is exciting.
Yeah, no, thank you.
Amazing. I'm just thinking of I listened to a talk on the sounds of manatees chewing and how informative just munching sounds can be underwater. So now picturing giant tadpoles eating as well. Do we have any other questions? All right, long pause passed. I think we can leave it there. Thank you so much, Jack. Everyone can send their emojis and thank yous in the chat. And I just have a couple last announcements. So we'll have this will be our last seminar for the year, but we'll resume the series on January 10th. You can register for that on the FishSounds Educate page. And that one will be a little bit of a break from this format. We'll be talking about the potential for a community-led special issue on underwater sounds. And so we'd really love participation in that if you're interested. And then after that, if you're curious to hear more about those snapping shrimp that Jack mentioned, we'll have Ashley Lillis talking about her work on invertebrates and especially snapping shrimp. And then finally, if you missed any of our previous talks and are interested, you can find those all on our YouTube channel. And if you want to share this talk with anyone, it'll be uploaded later today. So with that, I think that's everything. Thank you so much, Jack, again, for your wonderful talk and all the knowledge sharing. And I hope you all have a great weekend.
Thank you very much. And thanks for your great questions.
Thank you. Bye, everyone.